This is a weird way to end the campaign. You know, if Harambe was a harbinger of 2016, maybe the death of the squirrel and Fred the raccoon are a harbinger of what's to come. Signs pointing to Trump. It's just a weird story. So, a man. Turns out he's an OnlyFans guy. He's had a squirrel for 5 years named Peanut. Peanut was a squirrel his mother was run over by a car, and Peanut was tiny and unable to take care of itself, so this guy adopted Peanut, the squirrel, in New York. And Peanut became an online sensation over the years, would run around this apartment wearing a cowboy hat, and the guy also rescued a raccoon. Side note, my wife wants a pet raccoon worse than anything. She is obsessed with raccoons. And I have a friend who's a very prominent national reporter, y'all would all know, who every time there's a violent raccoon attack somewhere, he sends it to me and says, they're going to claw your wife's face off. Tell her not to get one. Yeah, my wife really wants a raccoon. Well, in this case, this guy rescued animals. Now, in New York State, it's against the law to harbor wild animals without a license. And this man was attempting to get a license for Peanut and Fred. Well, the backstory here is he's had this squirrel for 5 years now. The squirrel, Peanut, became an internet sensation. Had its own Instagram account, was on TikTok, millions of views, went viral. And a bunch of online people, they were referred to in the story as Karens, but we try not to use that term to offend our friends named Karen, but that's how they were referred to in the stories. A group of online people, and you know and I know, and this is the term I use, they were awfuls. Affluent female white urban liberals who have too much time on their hands. And the affluent female white urban liberals, the awfuls, they started raising complaints. It's against the law to have a wild animal in your house. You have to let him go. And the guy's point was this wild animal, the squirrel Peanut, has been in my care since it was a baby. It could not survive outside. He lives inside my home. But the complaining of the internet mob was enough. That the Department of Wildlife showed up at his home and held him for 5 hours while officers attempted to capture Peanut and Fred. Peanut bit one of the officers trying to capture him, and that was enough. They had to check for rabies. Do you know how they check for rabies? Do you know how they check for rabies? They have to sever the heads from the bodies. Or at least that's what they like to do. You can't test for rabies with the animal being alive, so the good internet awfuls who badgered and harassed wildlife to liberate Fred and Peanut got Fred and Peanut murdered. The state murdered these two animals. New York State killed Peanut and Fred to test them for rabies. Did the internet horde know that Fred and Peanut would be going to their deaths? I suspect they didn't care. Think about this. The state of New York sent at least 6 officers to this man's apartment to capture a squirrel and a raccoon to murder them. This is why I support small government. Here's my buddy Scott Jennings on CNN.
Well, I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of Peanut the squirrel. God rest his tiny soul. Not since the squirrel that was taught to water ski has a squirrel caught the nation's attention like this one. Now, this squirrel was squirrel napped and murdered by the state of New York. An absurd abuse of government overreach. There are 40 million rats or something in New York, and they executed the only one trained to wear a cowboy hat and had an Instagram account. My condolences to Mark Longo, who cared for Peanut for 7 years, and to the cowardly neighbors who filed the complaints about Mr. Longo's animals, which also included Fred the raccoon. I ask Why are you the way that you are? I hope you're happy, you mom.
I'm not going to.
There you go. Good for yeah, 7 years, not 5 years. I thought it was 5 years. 7 years. The squirrel and the raccoon weren't bothering anyone. It was just the internet activists, the mob. They didn't like that the squirrel and the raccoon were captured. This is news anchors in New York on the story. This is actually kind of funny. Those of you on radio cannot see the looks on this anchor's face, but just absolutely incredulous the state of New York would do this.
We have a very disappointing and sad update now on the saga of Peanut, the squirrel.
You might have heard this little guy's been making headlines this week, and New York State officials now tell us the pet squirrel has been put down. Authorities seized Peanut from a home in Pine City, New York. It's a little south of Elmira. Apparently, there have been multiple complaints. Peanut's owner says the squirrel's mother was hit by a car, and he'd been taking care of the animal ever since. The owner runs an animal sanctuary and says he knows it's illegal to own a wild animal without a license, and says he was working to get Peanut certified as an educational animal. A raccoon taken during the same raid also put down. The State Department of Environmental Conservation says all this is done to test for rabies. All right, that's what Albany's focusing on.
Oh, looks on these two anchors. Y'all, this is absurd government overreach. And this kind of is one of the things the election is about. The neuroses of progressive white women. Because you don't even have to know the names of the people who complained, and you know them. You know, white, wealthy women are the most in-your-face, obnoxious people in America these days. They think they are your boss. They think they control everything. And they are the online hecklers who summon the Department of Wildlife to kill a raccoon and a squirrel because some guy is enjoying their company without their permission. How dare you? You know it's true. Now listen, those of you who are women listening to me right now, if you're not the affluent, white, female, urban liberal who is in everybody else's business, I'm not talking about you, and I think most of you know that. But you know exactly the type of person I'm talking about. You don't have to know anything about the people who complained to know they were a group of affluent, white, female, urban liberals. How dare this guy have a pet squirrel? And this entire election essentially comes down to the neuroses of these affluent female white urban liberals. They're the people not you're going to wear a mask. They're the people who demand you get your 250th COVID shot. They're the people who insist that your child with Down syndrome should probably be aborted to save everybody heartbreak. They're the people who insist that their opinion must be heard and that if you dare to question them, well, you're a misogynistic bigot. They are the people who believe they're going to have to wear a Handmaid's Tale costume if Donald Trump gets elected. It really is absurd. They are neurotic. They are bossy. They are in your face. They are opinionated, and you're not allowed to question them. And they get this look in their face, this mean look. Y'all know exactly who I'm talking about. They just have to share their opinion. They just have to do it. In this election, in 2024, there are a bunch of stupid people on the Republican side. There are. Y'all, listen, the RFK fluoride debate, you know, he says we're going to ban fluoride. You know, fluoride in water is actually one of the health breakthroughs on planet Earth. There is a minimal amount of fluoride in water, but it has solved so many dental problems. You know, in Alberta, Canada, they decided after listening to the stupid people to get the fluoride out of water. Do you know dental disease among children went up 700%? Now, yes, there is a judge who has said we actually should see if it has any relation to the IQ. There is a study that fluoride in water at massively, massively, massively higher amounts than what we put in our water can cause brain damage, which we've always known. Fluoride can be a poison at high doses. We put in very minimal doses, and it has solved a massive amount of dental problems. And the stupid people are like, well, it could be making us dumber. Clearly, you have avoided the fluoride, and you're a stupid person. Singapore has 100% mandatory fluoridation in water at levels equal to the United States, and no one's questioning the IQ of their kids. So maybe it's not the fluoride, you morons. We got stupid people on the Republican Party side, the people who embrace RFK as some sort of genius because they can't figure out what's going on, and they're stringing lines together, and they've come up with this idiot as their messiah. The Democrats actually, by and large, all the data shows they do have a higher professional class. They do have people with higher incomes and more college degrees and the like. But here's the problem. They are full of insane, neurotic people. And I suspect this election is going to come down to Americans would rather hang out with the dumb people who question fluoride in water than the neurotic people who will get a squirrel and a raccoon murdered because some guy's having fun on the internet with them. It's the neurotics who are in charge of the Democratic Party. White progressive women have moved the Democratic Party so far to the left, they think it's perfectly fine for a boy to have his private parts cut off and a girl to have her breasts cut off to conform their body to what their crazy mind says they are. And you're a bigot if you disagree. This election is about the conspiracy theorists versus the neurotics. And I think Americans are going to go with the conspiracy theorists who are dim-witted rather than the neurotics. Yeah, I'm sorry. Listen, if you want to call in and argue fluoride with me, have at me, because I know what the data is. And I know the massive number of countries that put fluoride in water, and no one's accusing their kids of having low IQs. We just have a bunch of busybodies on both sides. But the busybodies on the right, sure, they want all your children's teeth to rot and ruin America with dumb science that isn't really science. But on the left, they're getting squirrels and raccoons murdered in New York because some man had fun on the internet and, by the way, had rescued the animals. I want a government small enough that it doesn't have enough time or manpower to send 6 officers to spend 5 hours to capture a squirrel that was bothering no one. This is why I'm a small government conservative. I want a government small enough to be drowned in a bathtub if need be. And it's kind of the weird defining story at the end of this election season. A squirrel and a raccoon murdered by the state of New York because a bunch of what summoned a mob complained, and they sent law enforcement to capture a squirrel and a raccoon. The perfect story to end campaign 2024 on. Ann Selzer is the best pollster in America, but she doesn't always get it right. Here's what Ann Selzer does that makes her so unique and actually better than everybody else. She doesn't model her vote based on the last election. So what does that mean? People will go to the 2020 election. They'll say, how many white people, how many black people, how many Asian people, how many Hispanic people, how many old people, how many young people, how many Republicans, how many Democrats. Okay, that's the same model we're going to apply now for 2024. Selzer doesn't do that. Selzer looks at the number of white people and black people and old people and young people and men and women and everyone else in Iowa. And she polls those people. And she asks them, are you going to vote? She does not go pull data on who has voted in the past to make them a likely voter. She does not ask a bunch of questions about people's voting propensities. She just asks, are you going to vote? And if they say yes, she considers them a likely voter. It's actually way more simplistic than other pollsters, and the result is she's gotten better data than everyone else. But she's had clunkers, too. She, for example, projected a Romney win when Romney lost. She projected a Gore win when Gore lost. She doesn't have a perfect record. No pollster does. Here's what makes her unique, in addition to the way she asks polling, and this genuinely makes her stand out. She's willing to put a poll out that's a bad poll. And by the way, she deserves credit for that. Here's the truth. You talk to any data scientist in America, they'll tell you 1 out of every 20 polls by a pollster is going to be an outlier. That is, it's going to deviate from everyone else. What you're seeing in the polling averages right now is hurting. That is, a lot of pollsters don't want to come up at the end and be wrong. Everything suggests it's going to be a close race, so all the pollsters are putting very close polls out. Some polls are deviating from the extreme, and so what are the pollsters doing? They're adjusting their numbers to make it look like everybody else. The New York Times, Sienna, and Ann Selzer are two of the very few who don't do that. They're not going to model their polling based on what other pollsters are finding. They're going to put their data out there, and if she's wrong, she's wrong. It's not going to end her career. It actually makes her a more credible pollster to pay attention to. Here's what I think Ann Selzer found, and the New York Times Sienna poll and a poll out of Kansas are showing the same thing. There is a late-breaking shift to Kamala Harris of undecided voters. It turns out, whether you want to believe it or not, the kickoff last Sunday at Madison Square Garden for Donald Trump actually left a bad taste in people's mouths. People saw Tony Hinchcliffe come out, make the racist jokes. They saw all the talk about, the Nazis did this, blah, 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 blah. It actually impacted the emotional undecided voters. Remember, an undecided voter right now is an emotional voter, not a reasonable voter. And it did affect them. Whoever put Tony Hinchcliffe on that stage to start that rally should never work in politics again. It was political malpractice. But then came Joe Biden's garbage comment, and then came the jobs numbers, but then came Trump's Liz Cheney statement. And what we have found from the late-breaking undecideds in the deep focus grouping of the undecided voters at the end is that they had made up their minds, you know what, my God, the economy was so much better than his, I'm going to go vote for him. And in this last week, all of these issues from the Trump campaign made him, I don't know that I can actually pull the trigger. I don't want to go through 4 years of that much drama. That was the problem. But, and there's a big but here, I don't know that the shift is enough. There's a wild survey out of Kansas that shows Donald Trump with only a 5-point lead, and it is white women who are the problem. And this goes to the whole Raccoon and Squirrel story. I think what pollsters are finding, and in fact pollsters are very open about this, is that white liberal women love to talk to pollsters. A white liberal woman wants you to know they're a Kamala Harris supporter. A white liberal woman has the bumper sticker on the car. A white liberal woman has the sign in the yard. A white liberal woman has the camo cap. A white liberal woman has the sweatshirt. A white liberal woman is an advertisement for Harris Walls. And they are the people most likely to talk to the pollsters. So when Ann Selzer says there's been this big shift among older white women towards Kamala Harris, of course, those women are finding the pollsters and calling the pollsters themselves to say, you're never going to guess who I'm voting for. This is a problem that a lot of pollsters are starting to talk about, that older white women are more progressive, the single ones in particular, and they're seeking out they want people to know they're voting for Kamala Harris. And so you can accidentally oversample these people, and I think that's what Selzer did. So yes, she's picking up a trend that's reflected in the New York Times, but I think it's an oversampling of these people. Trump voters are still the least likely people in America to want to talk to pollsters. They just want to go vote. And what are we seeing from the early vote? Kamala Harris's ads are all over Columbus, Georgia. Columbus, Georgia is a big military town. It is on the border of Alabama. In fact, Chad is calling from Montgomery, Alabama, and the rumor is down there that a bunch of Alabamians have bought a bunch of septic tanks, and when they learn how to drive them, they're going to invade Columbus, coming across the Chattahoochee River from Phoenix City. They hadn't figured out how to drive the septic tanks yet. Columbus, Georgia, big military town. And in Columbus, Georgia, you got the infantry down there, and you got a lot of people who live in the suburbs of Columbus who are very Republican. The suburbs around Muskogee County, Georgia, where Columbus is, are very Republican, but the inside of Columbus is very Democrat. Black voters in Muskogee County have only voted at 80% of the rate they did in 2020 for Joe Biden. The surrounding area where all the white people, all the Republicans live, is at 110% of turnout from 2020. There are counties in North Georgia that have early voted their entire 2020 vote. In other words, you look at how many people voted early and Election Day in North Georgia, and there are counties where more people have voted early than voted the entirety of 2020, and they're white. You look at any county in Georgia where the black vote is disproportionate, what you find is the early vote is less than it was in 2020. By the way, you go to North Carolina, same thing. The black voters in North Carolina are not turning out at the rate they were in 2020, and white Republican voters are disproportionately turning out. Now, the question is cannibalization. That's what Chad and I were talking about in our phone call. Some Republicans are worried that they've cannibalized their Election Day vote. That is, that the person was going to go vote on Election Day, but they voted early. Well, those are the same vote. So how many more Republicans are going to show up on Election Day than showed up early? If none of them do because they all voted early, well, then you're not going to get a different result from 2020, except the black vote is down. And the amount of black voters who would have to show up on Election Day in Georgia and North Carolina to overwhelm the polls is something that historically has never happened. The odds of it happening now are slim to none. It's never happened before. Those are the things keeping the Democrats up. Those are the things concerning the Democrats right now. And the Democrats, like in Pennsylvania, are saying, but look at the disproportionate number of women who showed up. The problem here is in Pennsylvania, women are disproportionately Democrat. So a woman voter is a Democratic voter in Pennsylvania. That's all you're seeing, is you're seeing the Democratic vote turn out with these women. But likewise, outside of the Philadelphia area, you're not seeing an increase in black vote. Now, that's not to say there are a massive number of black voters in Pennsylvania, but in the Philadelphia area, there are, and they're not turning out. Meanwhile, the working class white voters and Hispanic voters in the Pittsburgh area are showing up to vote early, and they're probably going to show up on Election Day. It's notable that Kamala Harris is going to spend her entire day today in Pennsylvania. Let me give you the map as a lay of the land right now. Democrats should win Nevada based on the polling, but the early vote in Nevada is so much in favor. Republicans have never historically turned out to vote ahead of Democrats in Nevada, and they have. Democrats are going to need to win independent voters by about 7% on Election Day to beat the GOP. Arizona looks to be going for Trump. Georgia looks to be going for Trump. North Carolina looks to be going for Trump. Kamala Harris spent some time in North Carolina there. It looks like she's now given up on North Carolina. Trump started the day there. He's going to be in multiple places in Pennsylvania and then end in Michigan. He's doing more campaign stops than Kamala Harris. If Trump wins, forget Nevada. If Trump wins Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, Donald Trump only needs to win one of the three Great Lakes states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. Kamala Harris will have to win all three of the Great Lakes states if Donald Trump wins North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. She's got to win all three of them. She's got to sweep. And she's only focused in Pennsylvania. It sounds more to me like Kamala Harris is trying to help Bob Casey at this point in Pennsylvania than help herself. It sounds more to me like Kamala Harris is trying to save the Senate for the Democrats than save herself. Donald Trump is going to all the swing states. Kamala Harris is not. That suggests to me that Donald Trump is in this to win and Kamala Harris is in this to minimize damage for the Democrats. You can only extrapolate so much from the early voting trends. But what you can extrapolate is this. Republicans overall have voted at rates we have not seen since George W. Bush's successful reelection campaign in 2004. And Democrats in Georgia, I can tell you from talking to Democrats in Georgia, they are very horrified by the early voting number for Democrats. They're not disappointed. They're horrified by the early vote in Georgia right now. The black vote in Georgia did not show up early for the first black female potential president of the United States. And by the way, the same thing has happened in North Carolina, and they are very perturbed by it. There is a story that should send a chill up your spine. The Chinese have been able to hack the surveillance and wiretapping system that American telecom companies built for the use of the U.S. federal law enforcement agencies after 9/11. And they are currently in the system using it. Millions of mobile phone users on the network of 3 U.S. carriers are subject to Chinese government surveillance, in particular, the SMS and RCS system. So if you are an Apple user, if you're an iPhone user, Charlie, and you are texting other iPhone users, you get that blue chat bubble, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you're trading green chat bubbles with friends, if you're on the Android system, if you're on any other cell system that's not an iPhone, the Chinese are literally reading everything you have and able to snoop into your phone calls as well. Josh Rogan of the Washington Post is pointing this out. Several officials told me that targets identified by the intelligence community are senior government officials and top business leaders. It's much more serious and much worse than even what you presume at this point, says Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Senator Warner of Virginia. It's one of the most serious breaches in my time on the Intelligence Committee. The officials said the number of compromised targets identified in the investigation is growing. Multiple officials briefed by investigators said the U.S. government does not know how many people were targeted, how many were surveilled, how long the Chinese hackers have been in the system, or even how to get them out of the system. Right now, China has the ability to listen to any phone call in the United States, whether you're the president of the United States or a regular Joe. It makes no difference, said one of the victims, according to a briefing given to him by the FBI. This has compromised the entire telecommunications infrastructure of the country. The Chinese government could use its infiltration of the telecom network to disable them during warfare, for instance. The network collected from Americans, the information collected from Americans could be used for blackmail or disinformation. Not only are they potentially inserting malware to disrupt the telecommunications system, it's a surveillance system where they're compiling data on all of us. And here's the key point here. The government of the United States, led by Joseph Robinette Biden, the current president of the United States, has no idea how to get them out of the system. Let me say this again. The Chinese government is actively right now infiltrating the major telecom companies and our cell phone networks in this country. The Chinese government at this very moment has the ability to listen to your phone calls and read all of your text messages unless they're sent through iMessage. They can use that information to blackmail you. They can use that information to shut down our wireless telecom system. They can use that information to insert malware. They can use that information against the United States. It is the most massive security breach of our telecommunications system ever. And they're using the backdoor system developed by telecom companies after 9/11 for the United States government to be able to root out terrorism. And our government is doing nothing. This is a hard thing to talk about at the close of a political campaign when people are focused on the economy, they're focused on illegal immigrants. But this is a massive story. This is a massive big deal. Jamie Dimon, the chairman of Citibank, or Citigroup, I guess. The Citigroup, no, it's Chase. It's JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon. This is World War III has already started. And I don't necessarily think he's wrong. Certainly a Cold War period. Right now, China seems to be winning. Decline is a choice, and we seem to have chosen decline. The United States government has difficulty right now in Joe Biden's administration putting ships to sea, fixing submarines that need fixing, manufacturing weapons systems and ammunition at sufficient rates. We're dependent on the Chinese for microchips. And all of Chinese industrial capacity is militarized by the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. And we're doing nothing about it. Think about that balloon that flew over in February of last year. Got all the way across the United States snooping and collecting data. The Biden administration decided it was far better to allow the Chinese to spy on all of us than shoot it down, even over the mountains of the Rockies and the wide territory of Montana, lest it fall on someone and have to wait for it to get all the way across the United States and go into the ocean. And they claimed that they were able to jam it so that it couldn't actually get information, but only after the fact did they say, actually, that's not true. It's remarkable. We've gotten weaker. And this is the Biden-Harris administration. Kamala Harris is involved in this. This is a massive breach of our national security for which they haven't done anything. These are the sorts of issues that will shape the election. These are the sorts of issues that will shape the future of this country. These are the sorts of issues that are going to shape our ability to respond to China. And what we have in the Biden administration are a bunch of nonprofit academics who have taken over our national security apparatus, who do not particularly like the United States and certainly don't like Israel. And they've been caught flat-footed by this. The Chinese are in it to win it. Our academics are in it to lecture us and scold us. It's part of the problem here. The Biden administration overwhelmingly, the Obama administration actually set the record for most academics in an administration. The overwhelming number of people who worked for Barack Obama had never had a job in the private sector, and Joe Biden has actually beaten that record. Joe Biden now has more people in the Biden administration who worked in academia and nonprofits and not the private sector. And the academics have put us all behind. You know, John McCain, for all of his faults, said that Anthony Blinken was one of the most worthless public servants in America and should never be let anywhere near power. And then Joe Biden gets into the White House and makes him Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan's not much better. You know, Jake Sullivan's wife is running for Congress in New Hampshire. Did y'all see the clip of the lady? She immigrated from Asia, not from China, I think, but in very broken English. She's running as a Republican. She's the one who got the pocket constitution, read it, and became a conservative, supported liberty. She's running for Congress, and she doesn't have fantastic English. She's running as a Republican against Jake Sullivan's wife, who was just snide and arrogant in that debate against this Chinese immigrant lady, or Asian immigrant lady. We got a lot of people in this country who have fled the communists who would love to help. They're shut out of the Biden administration. This is a major national security breach. The Chinese have infiltrated all of our wireless telecommunication services. And you know one of the things you can do with wireless telecom now, you can track people. You find out someone's phone, you can track them wherever they go. You can track them across the country. The New York Times showed how this data can be used to identify key individuals and then follow them wherever they go. The Chinese now have that capacity. The Chinese now have access to all your text messages. They have all the data that you're downloading to your phone. You're looking at a pornographic site, the Chinese know. Your phone calls, they know what you're saying to your friends. Everybody needs to call a friend today and insult Xi Jinping. So the Chinese have it. Everybody needs to call a friend today and talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre, because I bet the Chinese soldiers listening to your phone calls have no idea about the Tiananmen Square. China has compromised our national security. They've compromised our cell services. And the most damning indictment of all is that the Biden administration has no idea what to do about it. And the President of the United States is back in Delaware, back on vacation. First of all, I want to encourage all of you to subscribe to the show notes so that for Election Day you get this. I have made sure. In fact, I'm gonna send this video monologue out tomorrow, and in tomorrow's show notes, I've already written them because let's be honest, there's not going to be any news tomorrow until the polls close. But I want to give you the state of play. And here's what I want you to know about tomorrow. And I'm going to do this all over again tomorrow as well. That's how strongly I feel about this needs to be said. So let me give you the state of play for tomorrow. At about 10 a.m. tomorrow, exit polling is going to be released. And that exit polling is going to be wrong. And I just need you to know the exit polling is going to be wrong. Why? Because the exit polling is released in 3 waves. The first wave is in the morning, and it is a compilation of early voting and early morning voting. The second wave at noon is the people who voted mid-morning to noon. The third wave is when the polls start to close in the evening after 5 o'clock. That exit polling you can pay attention to. Why? Why can't you pay attention to the early? So the early exit polling is unadjusted. It's raw data. You don't know when you get the early morning exit polling how many black people voted, how many white people, how many Hispanic people, how many men, how many women, how many old people, how many young people. You don't get any of the demographics. You just get the raw data. You don't get it for the midday exit polling either. And so you have this, if a whole lot of white people vote between 9 a.m. and noon, the exit polling you're going to see is going to make it look like Donald Trump is a crushing victory. If a bunch of women and black voters line up first thing in the morning, there's going to be this massive crushing victory for Harris. At the end of the day, what the exit pollsters do is they go back into the data for early voting and day of voting, and they look at how many Hispanic people actually voted, how many black people actually voted, how many men voted, how many women voted, how many Asians voted, how many people 65 and up voted, how many people 45 to 55 voted, how many people 55 to 65 voted, how many people 18 to 25 voted, how many 25 to 35 voted, how many 35 to 40. They make all these adjustments based on the actual numbers of people who voted and their demographic characteristics. How many college-educated people voted, how many people with a post-grad degree voted, how many people who are working class voted. And they take all of those numbers and apply them through computer modeling to the exit polling. And what you get is the most accurate sampling of Americans every 2 years. The exit polling in this country are the most accurate polls. They are polls relied on by everyone, and they are polls that never ask who you voted for. What the exit polling does is it asks why you're voting. What is your big issue? So if you get the adjusted exit polling in the evening, and it shows that 75% of women are voting for abortion rights, and women make up 60% of the vote, you know this is going to be a blowout for Kamala Harris. If, however, it shows the number one issue is the economy, and the majority of people voted believe the country is headed in the wrong direction right now, you know Donald Trump has won. But you can't believe the morning and the midday exits. You have to wait for the exit polling in the evening that has made the adjustments based on the demography of the people who are actually voting. You have to wait for the exits in the evening. Don't be fooled. So now, how does it work? Tomorrow at 7 p.m., Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia will have closed their polls. Now, Indiana and Kentucky close at 6 p.m., not 7 p.m. But they close, they're divided into 2 time zones. And so all of Indiana and all of Kentucky will be closed by 7 p.m. At 7:30, North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia will close. North Carolina, swing state, 16 votes. Georgia, swing state at 7 p.m., 16 votes. At 8 o'clock p.m., Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware, D.C., Florida, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Tennessee all close. And again, for Florida and Tennessee, they're split over time zones, so that's the latest poll closings. At 8:30, Arkansas closes, 6 electoral college votes. At 9 p.m. is the big one. Why? Because at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, South Dakota, Texas, Wisconsin, and Wyoming close. So at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, every one of the swing states except Nevada will be closed. And at 10 o'clock, Montana, Nevada, and Utah will close. At 11 p.m. Eastern Time, California, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington close. At 12 a.m. Eastern Time on November 6th, Hawaii closes. At 1 a.m. Eastern Time, November 6th, Alaska closes, and that's the end. Most of the states will this time count the absentee and early vote before they count the day of vote. So you hear about the blue shift overnight, and Republicans have used this as a conspiracy theory, and it's not a conspiracy theory. I know many of you want to consider this some sort of wild conspiracy theory. Here's what actually happens. In most states in the past, the election day vote is counted first. And Republicans tend to turn out more on election day, and so it looks really good. And then once the election day vote is totaled, they start totaling the absentees, and they count the absentees, and they count the early vote. And Democrats vote early and absentee. And so you see this big shift to the Democrats. And Republicans, this is a conspiracy theory. Look, they're adding votes to the Democrats. No, you idiots. It's that they counted the absentee and early vote after they counted election day. A lot of states, because of this conspiracy theory, are flipping it. And so you'll actually see the early and absentee before you see the day of. Wisconsin's not. Wisconsin's going to be a problem, just so you understand, and Pennsylvania too. It could take those a while to come in. But Georgia is going to have its early and absentees processed by 8 p.m. Florida is the gold standard. Florida does its elections better than anybody. Florida will close at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Florida actually closes at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, but the Panhandle is in the Central Time Zone, so it closes at 7 p.m. Central Time, which is 8 p.m. our time. Now, here's what's going to happen. And again, no conspiracy theory. Let's take the state of Vermont. The polls will close at 7 p.m. Eastern Time in the state of Vermont, and it will probably be the very first state called, and it will be called for Kamala Harris. In fact, when the polls close at 7 p.m., Wolf Blitzer may break in and say, "We've got our first race to call. Breaking news happening now. The state of Vermont and its 3 electoral college votes going to Kamala Harris." That's going to surprise not a single one of you. The surprise will be if Georgia, when the polls close at 7 p.m., comes in and they call it for Harris or Trump. If they call Georgia for Trump or Harris within the first 30 minutes after it closes, it's going to be a big night for one of those candidates. Some states you can call very quickly. For example, West Virginia will close at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to call that one for Donald Trump pretty quick. And the reason is because the pollsters use a very good model based on who voted. You've got to understand this. We know when the polls close, the modelers for calling the races, they look at key areas of states. So they're not looking, for example, let's take Rabun County, Georgia. I'm on the radio up there in Habersham County, actually south of there. The signal picks up into Rabun County. Rabun County is where my family and we love to go up there to the mountains to Lake Burton. I'd love a house on Lake Burton one day if I become a bajillionaire. Lake Rabun actually is a little more private nonetheless. I digress. That county is going to vote for Donald Trump. That county is a massively Republican county. And you know what? The exit pollsters are not there. They don't care about Rabun County. Why? Because it's not a swing county. The exit pollsters, they're in Cobb County. The exit pollsters, they're in Henry County. The exit pollsters are in Houston County. The exit pollsters are in parts of North Fulton County. The exit pollsters, in other words, are in the swing areas of the swing counties of the swing states. And if, based on their modeling, they see the vote coming in disproportionately for one candidate or the other in those areas, they can call a state very early. This isn't actually rocket science. You just have to have a good understanding of statistics, and most people don't, so they see conspiracy theories. It's like, for example, Fox News was able to call Arizona. To this day, Republicans are mad at Fox News for calling Arizona. They got it right. People forget they got it right. Why did they get it right? Because they had great statisticians, and they could model Arizona accurately enough to know that Donald Trump had lost Arizona in 2020. Same thing with Georgia and Biden. I suspect this time's going to be different. Based on what I'm seeing on the ground right now, I suspect they may be able to call Arizona. Arizona's going to close at 9 p.m. Eastern time. They may be able to call it pretty quick for Trump. But that's what you need to know for Election Day. Do not believe any exit polling data until after the sun goes down, because it's not going to be adjusted. And keep in mind the flow of the states as things get started after the polls close, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. All of the swing states except Nevada will be closed by 9 p.m. Eastern. Nevada closes at 10 p.m. Nevada is the least important of the swing states. Why? Because it's only got 6 electoral college votes. Arizona has 11, Wisconsin has 10, Michigan has 15, North Carolina and Georgia both have 16, and Pennsylvania has 19. Nevada is gravy. If it's a very tied race at 9 p.m., Nebraska's 2nd congressional district will matter. There are 5 congressional districts in Nevada. There are 5 electoral college votes. There are 3 congressional districts. The 2nd congressional district there is the Democratic district, and Nebraska divides its electoral college votes up, 2 for the winner and then 1 for each congressional district. But this is going to be a pretty straightforward night. I just don't want you to get ahead of yourselves. I want you to subscribe, and we're going to push this out to everybody tomorrow just so you have it, so you'll be more informed than all your friends. If you text DATA to 33777 right now, text the word DATA to 33777, that top link back, subscribe to the show notes. Now, if you follow that link, you're going to get a discounted for a paid subscription, but you don't even need a paid subscription for the show notes. Why? For tomorrow, I've already done it. It's going to go out when the show starts at noon tomorrow, and it's going to give you, here's the Electoral College from 2020, here's the Electoral College shift for 2024, here are the undecided states, here are the poll closing times, here's when the exit polls roll out, here's when you can start believing the exit polls. Until then, don't believe anything. And I want you all to have that for tomorrow. It's very important to me that you have this so you're prepared for election night, and you'll be the most informed person in your circle of friends. I think I speak for all Americans at this point when I say, at this point, I don't care who wins, just let it be over. Let it be over quickly. I hope whoever wins in a landslide, so we know by like 10 p.m. on election night we can all go to bed happy or sad. I do have to tell you, though, that if your world is going to be shaken by one of these people winning, you need to work on your spiritual life, because life is too short to be whipped into existential frenzy over who the president of the United States is going to be. Now, I want to talk to you about a moment, and I was reading, I got to give credit to John Ellis, because I had heard this from people, and he writes a political email, and I get it. I subscribe so you don't have to, and he points it out. I had talked to several Democrats of prominence, and I've talked to Republicans, and all of them have been telling me that this ad stopped Kamala Harris in her tracks and started the rebound for Donald Trump, and that when you model out when the ad started, you can see a direct correlation to Donald Trump turning his campaign around. We need to set the stage here for this, and I'll credit John Ellis with this part of it. You know, we begin with Joe Biden and his disastrous debate performance. And he's got to bail. He's in free fall in the polling. Donald Trump's rebounding. Democrats are pouncing. Joe Biden's got to go away. They have the Republican convention. It ends on a meandering, undisciplined speech by Donald Trump. And then Kamala Harris comes out and becomes the nominee. She goes through the Democratic convention. She gets a polling bounce. She's ahead in the polling. And she and Donald Trump have a debate, and it is disastrous for Donald Trump. And he begins sliding in the polls, complete campaign freak out. What are they going to do? And then they release this ad. And this ad halts all of the downward trajectory for Trump. It halts all of the upward trajectory for Harris and begins to drag Harris down and pull Donald Trump back up in the polling. It's been vilified by the media. It has been attacked as demagoguery and hateful, and it's worked. Before I play it, I need to talk about Willie Horton. The Democrats have developed a mythology about Willie Horton. In 1988, Al Gore attacked Michael Dukakis over Willie Horton. Willie Horton was a prisoner in Massachusetts. Willie Horton happened to be a black man serving a life prison sentence, but he was on furlough. In Massachusetts, Massachusetts had an idea of furlough. And while he was serving, he was allowed out for weekends. He failed to return and committed assault, armed robbery, and rape in Maryland, where to this day he's in jail. Al Gore used Willie Horton against Michael Dukakis to show that he was soft on crime. And Al Gore lost the primary. Well, George H.W. Bush resurrected the Lee Atwater attack. Lee Atwater was a famous campaign consultant for George H.W. He was ruthless. And he had a quote. The quote was, "By the time we're finished, they're going to wonder whether Willie Horton is Dukakis' running mate." Well, the Democrats, ever since, the ad was powerful. The ad was powerful. Willie Horton was allowed out of prison on a weekend and raped someone and committed armed robbery in Maryland while he was out of prison on the weekend, thanks to Michael Dukakis' weak on crime policies in Massachusetts. And then Michael Dukakis, on a stage, was asked by Bernard Shaw of CNN, if someone raped your wife or murdered your wife, should they get the death penalty? And he hesitated and said no. It amplified the Willie Horton attack. It showed Michael Dukakis soft on crime, and George H.W. Bush crushed him. To this day, the Democrats claim that Willie Horton was a racist, nasty ad. And George H.W. Bush and Lee Atwater were racists for running the ad because they can't handle the truth. The ad was damning because it showed the Democrats to be weak on crime, and Al Gore himself had used Willie Horton. Now they're going to do that to this ad from Donald Trump. This is the ad. By now, you probably know what ad I'm talking about. This is the ad.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners, every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
That's the ad. That is the ad the Democrats hate. That is the ad vilified by the media. In fact, John Ellis in his email points to this, how ABC News characterized it. Millions of dollars from Republican groups and figures are being poured into an anti-transgender ad criticizing policies that support the trans community, despite these issues being among the least important concerns motivating voters headed into the 2024 election. Do you know the name of the ad? Do you know what they called the ad, what the title of the ad is? Every ad has a title. Do you know what this ad was called? Nonsense. Nonsense. That ad saved Donald Trump's free fall and caused him to rebound. If you're a Democrat, it may make you very mad to know that, but this ad had an effect with young black men. It had an effect with moms. And here's the problem for the Democrats. The Democratic Party has gone all in on trans rights. In fact, at the end of the ad, the video shows Kamala Harris with a picture of that guy who stole people's luggage, would dress in dresses and wear bright red lipstick and had a shaved head and would dress up as a dog to have sex with other men. And then also with Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. It's got an arrow and it says Kamala Harris is for they, them, and shows them. And then the ad pivots to Donald Trump, and it says Trump tax cut benefited the middle working class. And it shows a picture of a Hispanic family, a mother and a father and their smiling child. It says Donald Trump is for you. Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. Every major Democratic strategist I've talked to and every major Republican strategist I've talked to says that is the ad that saved Donald Trump. And that's a problem for Democrats because Democrats have gone all in on trans rights. I don't want to offend any of you, but I know I'm going to because you're an easily offended group of people. Transgenderism is weird. It is not normal. It is an affront to science and basic biology. And a whole lot of people, including gay people, concluded with the end of gay marriage, you know what, we've got equality, let's let everybody alone. And you know what the white progressive Democrats did is say, we can't leave people alone. Now we need to allow boys to chop off their biological reproductive organs and girls to chop off their breasts, and we need taxpayer funds for it. And we need you to be convinced that a boy is a girl and a girl is a boy. For the Democrats running against Donald Trump claiming that that the Republicans are weird, this is not only weird, it's offensive. It doesn't just violate basic tenets of religion for Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and Christians. It violates basic science. For a party that claims itself to be pro-science, it is not scientific to say boys can become girls. And when you trot out a bunch of experts that say actually it is, and you find out your PhDs have PhDs in art history and sociology, not in hard sciences. You have hospitals performing surgeries contrary to state law. You know, down in Texas, the Biden administration is prosecuting a whistleblower. Oh, the state law prohibits trans surgeries on minors, and the whistleblower actually documented that it was happening. The Biden administration is prosecuting the whistleblower. Not only are they prosecuting the whistleblower, they tried to use a U.S. attorney who had been disbarred by the state for failure to pay dues to do so. Democrats have a huge problem here because the trans issue is not going away because the trans agenda is a militant agenda. And it is an agenda that offends black voters and Hispanic voters and Asian voters and working class white voters who do not think, regardless of your own personal picadillos, you know, a lot of these people are like, you know what, if you want to do this, go for it, but I don't want my tax dollars used on it, and certainly not for prisoners. And here comes Kamala Harris, who says that the government itself should fund it. The government itself should pay for the transitions of prisoners. And the Trump campaign used the most prominent black voice on radio, Charlemagne, to ridicule it. And by the way, he's a Harris supporter. And even he is ridiculing this as nonsense.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners, every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I got to tell you, one of the reasons that I want Trump to win tomorrow is for the Democrats to have to reconcile themselves to this stuff. The major donors of the Democratic Party are progressive wokes, and they used their money to force the Democrats to move left on a host of these issues. And in moving left on these issues, they've moved the media on these issues. And in moving the media on these issues, they've alienated the media and the Democrats from mainstream middle-class voters who are fine, whatever your peccadillos are behind the scenes, but don't want it imposed on them and their families. They have radicalized teachers to cover up what's happening in schools, and the best the Democrats can do is deny that it's even happening when it is happening and it's documented, and then you're a bigot for pointing it out. The Democratic Party needs to lose tomorrow to come back to common sense, frankly. If the Democratic Party does not lose tomorrow, it's going to think that this crazy issue is mainstream. If the Democratic Party doesn't lose tomorrow, it's going to think itself losing its mind on these cultural issues is a good thing. It's why, more than anything else, I think Donald Trump needs to win, is because the Democrats have gone nuts, and they and their chorus of the media say it's the Republicans who've lost their mind. It is not the Republicans chopping off the parts of children, claiming that to be normal. It's the Democratic Party doing it, and they can't only admit that they're doing it, but then they call you a bigot when you point out it's actually happening. They've got to lose tomorrow to come back to their common sense. Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. The phone number 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, New York Times technology union members are threatening to strike. Here's what they want. They want a ban on scented products in break rooms. They want unlimited break time. They want accommodations for pet bereavement. And my personal favorite, they want a mandatory trigger warning in company meetings discussing events in the news. There's a Pinochet joke in there somewhere, but I'd get hate mail if I made it. Good Lord, these people are children. Fire them all. Good grief. They're threatening to strike on Election Day so they can't do the election needle maneuver thing for the Times. Just ridiculous. What a bunch of children. Okay. I gotta talk to you about this election. I want to play you this clip. This is from Chuck Todd. He was on Meet the Press yesterday, making a point a lot of people have been making lately.
It may also be that you shouldn't nominate an anti-democratic felon. You know, I mean, it may not be about the issues. So it may be about the person who's
This
at
is
the
Jen
top.
Psaki talking
There's lots
first.
of ways to look at it.
I'm not going to sit here and say that the Democrats are the paragons of virtue and the defenders of democracy. I think there's plenty of evidence that when you nominate somebody who didn't win any one vote, it's hard to suggest you're the defenders of democracy. But I do think that the Republicans in this cycle have abandoned what they traditionally stood for. And so I think there should be a reckoning inside our party.
Chuck?
Well, look, the fascinating aspect of this is neither party is going to be satisfied. They're not going to accept defeat. The question is, do you accept defeat because you don't like the vote count? Or do you not accept defeat because you don't like how the party did it, right? My greatest fear about this election is if Trump wins, I think it, for a generation, is what they believe this is how you conduct yourself in politics, and that this will cement this for a generation. I fear the transactional nature of him could actually turn the party into a kleptocracy if we're not careful. And one thing about political parties when they lose, they end up trying to emulate the party that wins, not necessarily. And while Democrats have been trying to be the anti-version of this, losing 2 out of 3, there's going to be its own reckoning inside the left that could have some saying, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. You know, whether it's lying or exaggerating, whatever you want to. I do think that is what I think is on the ballot about our politics going forward for another half generation.
You notice the fallout and the logical conclusion for Chuck Todd there is that the Democrats are going to become like the Republicans as opposed to realizing they need to move right, which is actually a big fear of the progressives. But larger issue here. I actually am in the minority on this, but I think I'm right. I think Donald Trump has every incentive to, if he loses, accept the results and move on graciously. Now, I know you're not hearing that from anybody else. And I totally acknowledge that I could be wrong. The past is the best indicator of the future, and given 2020 and how he handled it and claimed it was stolen, I mean, I know if Kamala Harris wins, every Trump supporter is going to say they stole it. A buddy of mine actually sent me another video that is circulating that shows a bunch of voters in Pennsylvania Their birthdays are less than 9. This actually came up in 2020. It's the same thing. These are voters who are so old that it messes up the computers now, and it makes them look like they're 9 years old as opposed to 89 or 90 years old. This came up in 20 videos again. They're not true. Even the Republican National Committee is saying they're not true, but they're still being circulated by a bunch of Republicans already trying to seed the ground that the race was stolen. It's actually a terrible sign for the Trump campaign that his supporters are spreading these rumors and these edited videos to show, oh, they stole it. They stole it. They actually, I guess, think he's going to lose tomorrow. Donald Trump has every reason to accept his loss graciously tomorrow because he has a prison sentence waiting for him on the other side of the election. That New York case. The judge in that case has postponed sentencing until after the election. If Donald Trump argues that it was stolen, he's going to go to jail. You and I both know that judge in New York is going to throw him in prison if Donald Trump loses and makes a big deal out of the loss and claims it was stolen. The judge is going to throw him in prison. He's still got Jack Smith waiting for him. Jack Smith is appealing the classified documents case in Florida. Jack Smith is moving forward with the case in Washington. Fani Willis' case in Georgia is imploding. But Jack Smith's cases are not really imploding, and Jack Smith could potentially get a new judge in Florida that's sympathetic to him. Donald Trump, if he plays it nice, he's already said if he loses, he's never running again. If he loses, he's never running again. He's already said it. That not me, that's Trump. He said it multiple times now on the campaign trail. So if Donald Trump does lose, and I actually think he's going to win, but if he loses, he comes out and he congratulates Kamala Harris on making history and says it is a historic moment, the first woman to be president of the United States. Ha ha, Hillary, you sucker. Kamala Harris could do what you couldn't do. And he departs gracefully. That may neutralize the issue. You'll have reporters say, I can't believe he did it. The judge in New York will look at it and say, I think he probably doesn't need to go to jail now. He's not a menace to society. Kamala Harris can say, okay, it's time to move on. I'm going to pardon Hunter Biden and I'm going to pardon Donald Trump. We're going to shut down the Jack Smith investigations and we're going to move on. We're going to move the country forward. She'd be able to do it. Now, of course, if Donald Trump wins, the Democrats have every incentive to play nice because they're already out there saying if Donald Trump wins, he has an enemies list and he's. I want to read for you what I wrote this morning. If you haven't seen my morning piece, laid it down why I think that ultimately Trump is going to win the election. I wouldn't be surprised if Harris wins. It is that close. I wouldn't be surprised if Harris wins. But this is what I wrote this morning. On a personal note, I think too many reporters in Washington and New York have become arrogant, condescending, and inside a progressive bubble. They elevate Republican voices who hate Republicans. They do not appreciate the concerns of many ordinary middle-class Americans who actually do think letting minors chop off their breasts or biological reproductive organs is insane. And it is even more insane to let a man with his biological organs still intact hang out in a girl's bathroom. By the way, that stuff's actually happening. They've decided a lot of Americans are just not smart and don't like them, and it shows in their coverage. I think it's nuts that Democrats think it's no big deal to fill the country with illegal aliens and transform some local communities and cultures into islands of third world non-English speakers who overwhelm social services, all while the media says it's not happening. Complain about it. I think the Democrats have been feckless and weak in how they're letting Ukraine defend itself and have given into their anti-Semitic impulses in dealing with Israel. Because they hate Netanyahu, they forced Israel to pull punches that should have been thrown. I think they've looked and acted weak to China and have emboldened our enemies. To the south of us, China, Iran, and Russia are presently working with both the Cubans and the Venezuelans, while our sitting president drools on a beach in Delaware and tells us he's okay. Haiti's collapsed. It's rife for foreign influence. We're doing nothing. I think Democrats wrecked the economy and used members of the press to blame Trump for their own profligate spending. I think members of the press hate Donald Trump so much they went all in helping Kamala Harris. I think Democrats and the media have conspired together to destroy the credibility of the United States Supreme Court, not because its decisions, process, or appearance of impropriety, but because they don't control it. I look at the reactions to NBC News hiring Rona McDaniel, the Atlantic hiring Kevin Williamson, the collective freak out about the Washington Post choosing not to endorse anyone, and I think these people need to be humbled. Claims that a prestigious private school in New York is going to allow kids off on Wednesday if they have mental anxiety over the outcome of the election. And I think that people who have psychological pain of losing need to lose to build their character and the weak children they've raised. A country cannot sustain itself and be prosperous when it's held hostage to the whims of neurotic, wealthy, white, progressive women who write big checks to the Democrats. So, yeah, I actually hope Donald Trump wins tomorrow. I don't care for him. You all know I don't care for him. But I care for the other side even less. They are the authoritarians they warned us about, and they don't even realize it. I think we will see a bunch of Democrats flee this country if Donald Trump wins, and that's not a bad thing. We may see the entirety of MSNBC go into exile. Remember when Bill Clinton won in 1993, those of you old enough to remember, for several years thereafter, Rush Limbaugh started his show every day, America Held Hostage, day 1, day 500, day 1,000, whatever. I think you could see MSNBC do that. America Held Hostage, America in Exile, MSNBC in Exile, Rachel Maddow live from Ottawa. It would be hilarious. I actually do think a number of these Democrats have so internalized Donald Trump as an authoritarian, they will pack up and leave. When Mary became Queen of England after the turmoil following the death of Henry VIII, a lot of Protestants fled England. And on her deathbed, racked by cancer, they started coming back. They knew Elizabeth would become queen and the Protestants would be safe, and they started coming back. I think you'll see the same thing, that Donald Trump gets elected. You'll see these Democrats who have so internalized their hatred for Republicans, they pack up and leave. They go into exile. They move to France. They move to Ireland. Ireland is happily anti-Semitic these days. They'll go there. They'll go to Canada. And they'll wait out Trump. They'll see the outcome of the 2028 election. Maybe so many of them will leave the Republicans as well. I don't think so. I think many of the people who say they're going to leave, they're not actually going to. It's just something they say. Kind of wish they would. My prediction for tomorrow, I'll just throw it all out there. I think that Donald Trump is going to win, not nearly as much as I thought he was going to win 2 weeks ago. I think starting last Sunday, Donald Trump has done everything possible to remind people why they threw him out of office the first time. It wasn't stolen. Now, I know if he loses, all of his hardcore supporters will say it was stolen, so they don't actually have to deal with the fact that they nominated the weakest of the Republican contenders because they wanted a do-over against Joe Biden. But I actually think he's going to win. I think he's going to win because of the economy. I think he's going to win because people have to spend $1,100 more today on the same things they were buying just 4 years ago. Their wages have not gone up concurrently. I think he's going to win because people are tired of having illegal immigrants flood into this country. The Democrats deny that it's happening and then call you racist when you give them the data. I think he's going to win because when he was in office, the Middle East wasn't in flames and Europe wasn't at war. I think he's going to win because people are tired of the Biden-Harris administration vacillating when it comes to dictators around the world, and Harris is the Harris of the Biden-Harris administration. And I think he's going to win because people are tired of progressive neuroses guiding and governing this country, from trans issues to convinced that we're all going to die because of climate change and everything else. I think he's going to win because people don't want to be forced into battery-powered vehicles. I think he's going to win. I can be wrong. It's going to be closer than it should. In the last week, Donald Trump has done everything possible to remind American voters why they threw him out. He had Tony Hinchcliffe on stage to amplify all the concerns about racism. He said what he said about Liz Cheney. It was bad enough what he said. The media blew it out of proportion, but it's bad enough. He's alienated women who are amenable to him, even with the pro-life stance. He's just in the last week collapsed. But the early vote has been so big and so good for the GOP, and the GOP tends to win on Election Day, that I actually think he's going to win, and I think a lot of progressives are in a bubble with a lot of the pollsters. And in the process, bring themselves to reconcile the data they're seeing on the ground. And the data points to Donald Trump winning. But if he loses, it was stolen. Saying it was stolen means you never have to say you were sorry you picked the bad candidate.